Let's get to Mike Gill joining us now on Birds 365. Mike, welcome to the show, man. How you doing? Appreciate you joining in on this Wednesday morning from 97.3 ESPN.
Good morning, everybody. What's going on?
Michael, I'm sure you saw the Howie Roseman comments from yesterday. We were just talking about him before you came on. And listening to some of the people that were there, I was texting with, there were off the podium comments that were a little more, I think defined than he was on the podium, which is no surprise. But I just want to get your thoughts of what Howie was trying to get across, because he talked about evolution. He talked about not looking the same way maybe that it traditionally looks. What do you take from just those little breadcrumbs from Howie Roseman as far as the Eagles in this offseason?
Yeah, I mean, he really kind of stressed that, it's going to be different and that they are going to have to get contributions from some of their younger players, right? I mean, it seemed like, I guess the one breadcrumb is if there's guys that walk or leave that we can't bring back, they think they have guys in the pipeline, Darius Slay, if he's not here anymore, we've got all these young players that we've had in the system for a while. If Josh Sweat leaves, we drafted a guy last year that we kind of like in that spot. If Milton Williams isn't here anymore, Mauro Ojomo's here, and Gabe Hall's the guy that we picked up that maybe people don't remember. But it seemed the messaging was if somebody leaves, we feel like we have young players that can kind of step into those spots. Now, I think it's kind of far-fetched to believe that they're not. I believe, I've said this on my show, guys, I think Howie is going to do what the Dodgers did here. They won a World Series and then said, we'll go out and get the best pitcher and then the next best pitcher and then have the whole league complain about us. I feel like they're at that point with, you have the last time they won, they had this window and they thought that the window was still there. So they put money into players that were older to try to win again. And that kind of backfired on them. This time their talent is in their 20s, mid-20s, late 20s. So I think they feel like they have 2 to 3 real windows with this core of guys like 26, 27, 28 years old. And then that's where you go and make the big splash move that can help you now. I know a lot of people talk about the Myles Garrett stuff, and I see people saying, well, I don't want to give up my future. I think the Eagles are saying our future is now. It is 2 to 3 years with these guys right here. And if we can add something that is right in their prime, lined up with those guys, I would think they would.
To your point, Mike, I'm amazed how many people talk about football like it's baseball or basketball and talk about their future. Like, so you're going to have this guy for 10 years in baseball. Your future in football is 2-3 years at all times.
You remember a time where the Rams were the laughing stock because they had no first-round picks, and everyone was like, they don't have a pick for like 9 years.
Yeah,
they were a play away from going to the NFC Championship game and beating the Eagles on the road
in the snow.
In the snow, I look at the Eagles too and say, listen, they have hit on every pick imaginable for like the last 3-4 drafts.
Yeah,
the well is going to run dry here, so I want to give you my pick and let you take it for me. Give me a player that I know can play, because I've been too hot with some of these picks in recent years. That's not the reason, but if I can look, pick 32 is a pick that is very tradable. So I think I'm sure you guys talked a little bit about what Jeremy Fowler said yesterday regarding Myles Garrett, but I thought what he said at the beginning of that clip was the more interesting part, is that the Eagles want to be the most aggressive team in the league in the trade market this offseason. That was the one that I was like, whoa, okay. So I think you're going to have a pretty aggressive offseason. Now, what he said yesterday makes it seem like that's not the case, but I think it's a smokescreen.
We'll see what ends up happening. Mike, a lot of people took away from Howie's comments yesterday that everybody could be out the door. I kind of hear what you were saying, where it's like, hey, young guys are going to have to play better. It's going to look a little bit unconventional. John still feeling like Zack Baun is a guy that they're going to sign. Did you feel like Howie was saying Zack Baun will not be back in Philly, or what did you make of those comments?
Well, wouldn't that be the unconventional thing that they spend the money on the linebacker?
That was John's point. Yep.
Right. If we're targeting somebody, it would be the unconventional guy in your mind. We see, and that's why I think Baun is the guy that, number one, they must bring back, and number two, that they will prioritize, because they don't mind investing draft capital in D tackle. They don't mind investing draft capital in edge rusher. They don't mind investing draft capital in offensive line. They don't want to invest draft capital in linebacker. So if I have a guy that I like, I know they don't want to spend money at that position, but maybe they have shifted a little bit and said, listen, we've paid this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. We have a little money left over that we can now overpay the linebacker that we generally don't like, because we don't feel like drafting another one. And we'll draft another edge. We'll draft another tackle. We'll draft another guard. That's why I think Baun is the guy that they'll target, probably spend money on him that they typically don't want to. They also don't want to spend money in running back. They decided to do that last year. Worked out for them. So I think Baun is the guy they'll prioritize over the other three, not because they don't like the other three, but, you know, you can't pay everybody. And they have a propensity to draft well at the positions they might lose.
There you go. That's a good point.
Yeah, and I think I read it the same way as you. He also talked about evolution, basically talking about Saquon and paying the running back position. I thought there were a lot of highlights that pointed to the Eagles understand they need Zack Baun back, and they want to bring Zack Baun back. And then the difference is, as you mentioned, and how we said, and I bring it up all the time, it was during the Cam Jurgens draft pick when he was getting a lot of heat. That's how we roll. He was talking about offensive front, defensive front. And he flat out said, if it's equal, we're going to lean towards those two parts of the roster building philosophy. And here's an instance where you got Milton Williams coming off the Super Bowl that he had, and Josh Sweat coming off the Super Bowl that he had, and they're not going to pay those guys. I think those are the guys out the door. And that is very un-Eagles-like, traditionally.
Yeah.
I think that's what Howie was alluding to. And they're typical decisions. You'd like to have them both back, but
both homegrown guys, too. Milton Williams in his 20s still. I mean, not an older player. So, yeah, he would be – and, Milton has the story of him and Tom Donahue. He was kind of the pick that was Howie's guy, and Donahue was like, great. So you would think like there was even an extra soft spot for him.
Right.
But I think, at the Super Bowl, I think I might have told you guys this before. I'm sitting there, and Drew Rosenhaus is behind me, and we're laughing about how Sweat went to Rosenhaus, and we said, look, Sweat and Milton Williams have the best two matchups on the field. They have the ability to make some money on Sunday night, and they have the matchups to make the money, and they took full advantage of those matchups and absolutely made themselves some money. So they probably have priced themselves out. Milton Williams would probably be the guy of the two. If they could pick two of the guys, I think it would be Milton Williams and Zack Baun to bring back. I think they would want to bring Becton back next. Josh Sweat, I think last year the writing was on the wall. He had a great Super Bowl. He had a solid season. I wouldn't say he had he wasn't a Pro Bowl or anything. So I think they're okay with Josh Sweat moving on. And that goes back to they like drafting at those positions. Those are positions they don't mind drafting and then just replenishing at those spots. They do have Jalix Hunt here, a guy they drafted last year in the 3rd round, who I think surprised everybody with the year he had, right? I mean, he nobody thought he'd put a helmet on for the most part last year. And here he is wrecking havoc, in playoff games and in the Super Bowl. So, I think it'll be interesting, but the whole evolution of getting to where you're comfortable with Zack Baun and saying he's our guy and then paying him, we'll see if that if they go through with that, because I think they should.
Yeah, and we'll see how much Zack Baun ends up getting paid. I mean, I know TJ Edwards is not even close to the same player, but think about it. He had a good year here, and they let him walk at $7 million. Now we're talking about a $15 million linebacker potentially. That's a tough putt, but he's a great player. Now it's only 1 year. How much does Howie factor that in? It'll be interesting to see. Mike, you brought up something interesting with the 2 to 3 year window. All right, and the Eagles are sitting at 32 in the draft right now. Sounds like you're in on the Myles Garrett move. What are you willing to give for Myles Garrett? And at what point would you walk away from that deal and say, you know what, I can't make that move right now? Because there's a lot of names being floated around there, Mike. And, you know, when you have the 32 overall pick, you're competing with teams that have a lot better draft picks. You're gonna have to sweeten that pot up a little bit. Is it Nolan? Is it Cooper DeJean? Is it Devontae Smith? And I know those names sound crazy. People are like, why would you ever send them? But you're going to have to send somebody to get Myles Garrett. What's too much for you, and what would you be willing to do to get Myles?
Yeah, that's been the big, is what do the Eagles have on their current roster that the Browns would ask for? Now, you mentioned other teams. You know, Garrett has made it pretty clear he wants to go to a Super Bowl contending team. So I don't know if he says, hey, I don't want to go to the XYZ team, who he deems to be a Super Bowl contending team and who he doesn't deem to be a Super Bowl contending team. Because obviously everybody has better draft capital right now than you do. So obviously 32 starts the talk, probably next year's first round pick as well. Then it becomes what player gets involved. Is it Nolan Smith, that level of player? Is it, somebody threw out on our show yesterday a sign and trade with Josh Sweat? I don't know that gets it done for Cleveland. Jalix Hunt's another young player. I don't know that he's ready enough to be able to bring you back a player like that. The guys you mentioned, I'm probably out on. Cooper DeJean, Devontae Smith, not moving there. But Nolan Smith is one guy that I think you have to consider. And you might, people out there say, no way. Nolan Smith, young player, not saying you shouldn't be excited about him, but what's his ceiling? Is he a 14 sack guy on the edge? Is he a 12 sack guy? Is he a 10 sack guy?
You're not Myles Garrett.
Myles Garrett gets 14. He's a disruptor. And with Myles Garrett, it not only is it Myles Garrett, it is also what it would do for Jalen Carter. I think Nolan Smith's a great player. Don't get me wrong. Wouldn't want to lose him. But you're talking about a different stratosphere of player here. I don't know if Nolan Smith's ceiling is a 14-sack season, and I think that's what you're signing up for with Myles Garrett. If you lose Nolan Smith to Cleveland, he probably goes there, and who knows? I mean, maybe he has 14 sacks for Cleveland, and they're 3-14. But is he getting 14 sacks and being that big of a disruptor here? Unfortunately, I don't see that for Nolan. I think he's kind of like in the 8 to 9 sack mold, somewhere in that range. Hopefully, I'm wrong about that. So I think Nolan you would have to consider.
So 2 1s and Nolan, you're pulling the trigger on that deal.
I think so, yeah. Because the ones for me at this point, look, you could get a player. Nolan Smith was what, the 30th pick?
30th pick.
30th, somewhere down there. You can find talent. It's not like the NBA where you're drafted at the end. You're just picking a guy and stashing him overseas for a couple of years. So these aren't just throwaway picks, but I think Philadelphia is young enough right now that they can afford to get a player who can put you over the top now. And you're already over the top. You just won the Super Bowl. Well, to become that next level franchise, that next tier, memorable teams, Philadelphia Eagles, back-to-back, one of the best. Now you're getting talked about as one of the best franchises and best runs of all time. You get a player like that does it for you.
I agree with you, but here's where I am on Myles Garrett. Boy, there's so much conflicting signals. You had the Fowler report, as you mentioned, talking about the Commanders. All of a sudden, Jonathan Allen's on the trade market. You can see was Washington bubbling up to try to get Myles Garrett. Then it becomes, I always bring up back in the day when the Sixers and Celtics were a great rivalry. The Celtics went out and got Dennis Johnson specifically to stop Andrew Toney. Then I look at it, that's also what bad GMs do. Like, you're worried about what another team's doing, changing your plan. That's the part that didn't ring true with Howie Roseman of Jeremy Fowler's report to me. But here's where I want to bring that up.
You mean
as
blocking
a whole.
Washington to get him, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's not how good GMs do business. That's reactionary. I don't think Howie would fall down that rabbit hole. But boy, Howie's in everybody's head, man. That's what I said before you came on, Mike. The tush push. Certain people want to ban the play. You know, I said, you want to stop the tush push? Here's what you do. I said on the show, ban pushing. The whole entirety of it.
Yeah.
It used to be illegal. Don't boil it down to one play. The Eagles ran 47 times this year. That's it. 47 times.
I say that about, like, do I want to see it banned? No, it benefits the team that I want to see it benefit. However, I do kind of think it's ridiculous that you can have two other players just physically push the guy forward, and the defense isn't allowed to get any leverage. They can't push off of somebody to get leverage. I mean, they're not allowed to do it. You know, like you talk about field goal blocks, they can't physically put their hands on someone to utilize him to get up. They can't do it. So why can't it? The play should be illegal. I'm not saying I want it to be illegal. I think the Eagles
you're going to get in trouble.
But
that's what I'm saying, Mike. It's a simple fix. You say, hey, we're going to ban pushing. Period. Then
I do think it is actually in the rules. I think it is a rule. They were talking about this morning on one of the radio shows, the ESPN National show, had it up on the screen. They actually had the rule up on the screen. It's like Rule 14, whatever, that you're not supposed to be able to push to help.
Well, no, you can push. They changed that rule in 2005. They changed that. It used to be illegal, and for some bizarre reason, for those who don't know, it actually started at the college level, the famous Bush push with Reggie Bush, if you remember that. That's when all of this got started. And for some reason, the NFL went down this rabbit hole. You see Sean McDermott, some guys talking about the health and safety. That's bullshit because nobody gets hurt on that play or nobody's gotten hurt. And the play is so used so infrequently, there's no way you can come up with a study. However, if you expand it to the entirety of the offense, and I bring up Devontae Smith in the Saints game, you remember when he almost got his head taken off and they wouldn't blow the whistle because they kept pushing him forward. And all of a sudden you got guys diving in after the play is over. It's such an easy fix. But the Eagles are in people's heads, and they go down the routes of one particular play instead of using, we're going to ban pushing on offense. And then they get it past this year. They will never get past banning the tush push.
See,
but they will get past banning pushing.
This is the rule. And Zander, I just emailed it to you. So if you see it and you want to put it on the screen, you can. No offensive player may pull a runner in any direction at any time, which is what they're not doing. Yeah. B, use interlocking interference by grasping a teammate or using his hands or arms to encircle the body. So that's not what they're doing. C, push or throw his body against a teammate to aid him in an attempt to obstruct an opponent or recover a loose ball. I mean, it says push or throw his body against a teammate in an attempt to obstruct an opponent
to cover a loose ball.
Yeah. So that's a little murky.
Yeah.
But
no, you're allowed to push. You're completely allowed to push. You can't push someone away from a loose ball, which again, the over legislation.
It is murky, man.
The over legislation of this league is ridiculous. That's another thing. You make it more difficult for the officials. Everybody hates the officials. Part of the reason I always say they don't hate the officials. Well, they do, but they hate the legislation of the game.
The legislation of the game.
Yeah. What they're asking the officials to do. So when you put, and again, 2005 was the year they put it back in that you were allowed to push players offensively. Now, if the ball's on the ground, you can't because then you're getting an unfair advantage. Again, the over legislation. But it's such an easy fix. Go back to the 2004 rule. No pushing whatsoever. Bam, it's done. And by the way, the Eagles are still the best quarterback sneak team in the football.
Yeah,
they were.
Yeah, now, I mean, Nick gave a whole passionate reason. Like they do it more, they practice it, and what goes into it, and the intricacies, and how much goes into it all, and so I'm not saying there's no skill involved in what they do intricately up front. I'm just saying I think the part of the two guys lined up behind Jalen Hurts, that part of it.
Well, here's the funny thing.
Could probably not be legal.
Jeff Carr, our buddy, and Mike's buddy as well, Mr. Stat, I like to call him.
I saw this stat.
Yeah, the Eagles were 39 of 48. They were better at quarterback sneaks during the Super Bowl 52 run, just traditional quarterback sneaks, because Carson Wentz was really good at it.
Right.
The offensive line, obviously, with Jason Kelce was tremendous. Percentage-wise, they were actually better with the traditional quarterback sneak. Now part of the reason there was a little bit of a downtick this year than there typically is because teams are so hyper-focused on stopping it. You have the Eagles occasionally jumping off sides. You have others jumping off sides. You have penalties. All that factor into it because everybody's so hyper-driven on stopping this particular play. If the Eagles just went back to the traditional quarterback sneak, they'd be more effective. I believe that. And I've said it, and they were, and they would be again. You're not stopping that offensive line and that quarterback.
It sounds, though, like it's not. I mean, 24 owners have to approve it. It's been on the table before. What traction did it get the first time?
Because they're trying to ban a play. They will never ban that play.
No, I'm saying, what traction did it get? Any traction, votes, or anything the first time it was on the table?
Well, I got a few, but when they bring stuff to the floor, they've already done the behind the scenes work. In other words, they removed it. They didn't vote on it because they
that's what I thought.
They knew they didn't have the 24 votes. They will not get 24 votes to ban the tush push. They will get 24 votes to ban pushing on offense if they want to go that direction, if they're smart enough to move it. And it sounds like there's enough people that are going to bring up the safety issue that can get that passed. But they're not going to pass it as long as it's currently constructed. They're not going to ban that play.
It's funny, though, how it has been the talk of the combine so far. I mean,
the Eagles are in people's heads.
Yeah, every team has this. I've seen at least 5 different, Morris in Atlanta. You had McDermott in Buffalo. You got the Green Bay, who's the ones who put it on the table. There's been a bunch of people commenting on whether or not Todd Bowles, actually, who's on the competition committee, doesn't think it should be.
Yeah, it's not getting passed.
This is my problem with the whole thing. All right, there's only one team this successful at doing this. This is a physical game in football. If you approach this, though, okay, every time someone's in 4th and 1, all they do is push, and they get a first down and they keep moving the sticks. The game has become boring. It's not that, though. The Eagles are the one team, the one outlier team that does this successfully because of the personnel, because of the players that they have, and because of the way they run it. I love Nick Sirianni's comment the other day. He's like, I find it disrespectful the way people talk about how easy this thing is. We work on this thing all year long. These guys put their bodies on the line to run this play successfully. So that's the one thing I hate about it. I'm like, why is everybody acting like this thing is a gimme? It's not a gimme. Well, you're going up against defensive linemen. It's not a gimme.
A lot of people thought that Jason Kelce was kind of the catalyst for it, and what happened when he was gone.
Well, they were better with Jason, by the way.
But they didn't stop doing it, and they got better at it as the year went on. So, yes, Kelce probably played a big role in it, but it wasn't just, hey, this is the guy who causes this to work. He might have been a big part of it.
With all due respect to Nick, though, because I thought, come on, dude. You look, first of all, Buffalo is very successful at it. And to Sean McDermott credit, he believes it should be removed because of the safety precaution. I don't know if it's credit. Credit's not the right word, but he's been very successful. And by the way, look who their quarterback is. Mm-hmm. This ain't brain surgery.
Green Bay ran it with a tight end, and they ran it pretty well.
Yeah, I mentioned that. A lot of teams do that in college level. They do it really effectively. And I think that's a way, if you can get a tight end like that, that's a good way to do it. But from Nick's standpoint, there's no contact in practice. Very rare. They're not doing scrums in practice. The Eagles are good. Let's be honest. The Eagles are good at it because they have the best offensive line in football, and they have a quarterback who can squat 600 pounds and is very savvy running the football. That's why Buffalo's number 2, because they have a quarterback who's an outrageously sized athlete, so they're very successful at it. Patrick Mahomes once got hurt. Kansas City doesn't even run quarterback sneaks because they're worried about getting the quarterback. There's so many quarterbacks who can't do it. The Eagles are successful because of their personnel, not because of their preparation on this particular play. This is not Bill Walsh, West Coast offense, fooling people. This is my guy's better than your guy, and we're going to push you off the ball. And my other guy.
But doesn't that prove it's not a good reason to ban the play?
I'm talking about the preparation standpoint.
Yeah, I got you.
I don't think they should ban the play.
I don't think they should ban the play.
Yeah.
I don't want them to change it. I'm saying if I was the NFL, I would just say, look, you can run the play. You can line up in that formation. You just can't have the 2 running backs directly behind the quarterback and then pushing him forward. I think that's where the play kind of becomes where people look at it and say, well, you're getting all this assistance to just push the pile forward because you got these 2 guys.
That's the part that drives me insane. They don't need it. Jalen doesn't need the help. He's getting it anyway.
Right. Well, the aesthetics of that part, I think, is where some people, but hey, if you keep, if they're going to keep it in the game, I think the Eagles will continue to prosper from it. And I'll be okay with that.
I have no
then
problem.
let me ask you this then, John, but because I don't necessarily disagree with you, but let's just say for a second the league does decide, okay, let's ban this play. Let's get rid of this stupid tush push play. Everybody's crying about it. All right, get rid of it. It's 4th and 1, okay, and at the opponent's 45-yard line. Are the Eagles gonna go for it?
Yeah.
All right. And then I feel like who cares at this point because the Eagles
because they trust the offensive line, they trust the quarterback,
which they should. By the way, I say this all the time: if you're a team that thinks you could win a Super Bowl and you don't think you can get a yard, I mean that's where that's where you are. You're a great team. We can get a yard whenever we want to. You're going to get stopped every once in a while. But ultimately, if you're that good with that offensive line, you got to be able to get a yard in any fashion. Tush, push, hand it off, whatever you do. That line should be able to get you a yard on almost every single play.
For me, it has nothing to do with the Eagles. I want pushing out of the game offensively. Has nothing to do with the Eagles, and I think if you frame it like that, you can get it out of the game.
For instance, could the defense essentially take the 2 linebackers and the safeties and line them up and have them just push each other forward?
Yeah.
So now you have all this inertia pushing. I mean, it's like a tug of war type of situation, and then the other part of it becomes like you got the 2 running backs back there. When do you put another guy back there and then another guy back there? You have to line up, obviously, but you can put 3 guys in the backfield.
You can.
Yeah, the one area I do think you can tell the pushing impacts is like there's some tush pushes that they start and it almost looks like for a second they might not get there, and then you kind of see the whole pile like move forward. Those are the ones where I think you could make a case like the pushing is why they converted it successfully, but I don't know. I think it's a little bit petty, to be honest, from the Packers and all that stuff, but I get it. I don't think you guys are wrong, but I do think that with the Eagles being the one team that is this successful with it, it's petty.
Hey, listen, if it wasn't the Eagles and this was some other random team that just happened to run this play a lot, I don't think anybody's really talking about it.
No, well, I don't think and that's the mistake of the people that want it banned. They shouldn't have boiled it down to one team, and success or failure has nothing to do with it from the perspective of why the people who want pushing out of the game. And I'm talking about Sean McDermott mentioned it yesterday. Again, number 1 in quarterback sneaks is the Eagles. Number 2 is Buffalo. Buffalo's had tremendous success, but Sean McDermott wants to remove it from the game. All right. Why does he want to remove it from the game? I don't know, Sean McDermott. He says for safety reasons. whatever. He's part of the competition committee as well. Certainly there's a safety dogma around the NFL. They do, this, Mike. You're a longtime football fan. I go back to Mike Allstock because that's when I think it changed. You remember in goal line offense back in the day, your forward momentum got stopped. They blew the whistle. The play's over. Now they let it go and let it go and let it go. And you got all these big bodies running in, trying to stop on both sides. You can see how that would be a safety issue.
Mike Allstock played in the first college football game I ever went to, Purdue, West Virginia.
Purdue, West Virginia. Great goal line runner. Yep. Remember Chris Berman used to have the great highlights of those Mike Allstock runs. But it used to be, all right, momentum, boom, whistle. And you play the next play. Now they let it go forever. And I think they've gone too far. And that's why I think eventually it's going to be removed. But it's not going to be removed if they continue to frame it as the Eagles tush push. They will not pass that. If they scale it back and say, we're going to remove pushing from offensive football, it will pass this year. I believe that. But, they haven't framed it like that yet.
Yeah, I'm watching on the screen here. There's a whole segment on this tush push, and there's Sirianni talking about it. And I'm watching some of it like this. There's the two that I just saw. Hurts barely even got touched by the two guys behind him. The offensive line just blew the defensive players off the ball, and he
typically landed. It's typically landed.
Yeah, no, he ran right to the left behind Dickerson, and.
Well, it is funny. I mean, there's a video floating around. The Packers are the one who submitted it. There is a video floating around right now of Jordan Love attempting a tush push. It was one of the worst tush pushes you'll ever see. So it's like, all right, if you want to freaking cry that someone else is good at it, then draft a different style of quarterback.
Well, and by the way, this was a discussion last year when this came up again, or was it last year, the year before, when they were doing it, and people were complaining about it then, about, hey, if you want to stop it, or if you want to, there's a Twitter meme of Sirianni where he's like, if everybody could do it, they would, and
that's true too.
Well, what's ironic about what you just said, Mike? Two of the last 3 years, there's been this come up in the offseason where someone tries to get the team banned or get the push banned. Those are the 2 years the Eagles went all the way to the Super Bowl. The year that they got bounced and destroyed in the first round of the playoff, nobody gave a shit. They still ran the tush push last year.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's hard for people to understand. Like, Green Bay did it, so I get, from a fan perspective, Green Bay's sour eggs, whatever. They were just jealous.
The quote is, it's bad for the game.
It's bad for the game, yada, yada. A lot of people have said that. They're going, again, I believe they're going about it the wrong way. Well, you're talking one of 31 teams. However, that's not how these things work, these rule proposals. Everybody puts them up. They all group together. One team's got to put them up. For whatever reason, Green Bay decided to be in the forefront of this particular one. There's other teams, as I just brought up. Sean McDermott is the second most successful team at quarterback sneaks. He's on record now saying, we got to get it out of the game. Like, it's not just Green Bay. Because that team, the Eagles, because of John Ferrari, over the past 10 years, nobody has put up more rule proposal changes than the Philadelphia Eagles. Nobody.
Since 2022, the Eagles have used that play 108 times.
Think about
the
that.
Next closest team is 55, Buffalo.
Yeah. 108 times over 3 seasons.
Buffalo's used it 55 times.
Yeah. The NFL is very dumb when they want something. They don't do it the right way. I always say. The over legislation, you put a face on it, and now you have all this. Eagles fans are upset. Packers fans are whiners, blah, blah, blah. Packers team's a whiner. And you got all these people in the background going, we got to get this out of the game.
Now, this one in the Super Bowl they used, he had about 4 guys pushing him forward here. 1, 2, Barkley, Goddard, Wilson. Who's this other guy in here? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, he had a nice contingent of guys pushing him.
And by the way, from a traditional quarterback sneak standpoint, again, I think people understand. You see now that people are so hyper-focused because of the Eagles' success. You see this big collective of everybody within an inch of the line of scrimmage, and everybody's jumping Frankie Luvu in the championship game.
Yeah.
Trying to time it, all that kind of stuff.
Well, will that be a discussion, John, of teams that will slow the game down with the penalties and that?
Yeah, that'll be part of the discussion. But if you take it out for those concerned that the Eagles won't be as successful, and again, the history and stats say they will be just as successful, arguably more successful, that loosens up that little interior in front of the quarterback. And then the quarterback can just run up to the line of scrimmage, walk up to the line of scrimmage, look at where the bubble is. This is what Tom Brady was great at. All right. You got 2 guys lined up over the right shoulder. I'm just going the other way. Simple.
Yeah.
It's not going to affect the Eagles at all. And I'm 1,000% certain on that. They will still be just as successful. They will, as long as Jalen Hurts and that offensive line are here, they're going to be just as successful. They're going to be just as aggressive because it's going to be a traditional quarterback sneak for them on 4th and 1 is just as easy as a tush push, arguably more easy because, again, you open it up a little bit. And that's how things sort of shift back and forth, the pendulum theory. So many people are focused on it. Now they wouldn't be focused on it, and it opens up something else. So we've wasted too much time on it, but that's my fault. Yeah. But, and again, how many plays, Mike? 100 and what over 3 years?
108, I think it said.
108. Who gives a shit?
Yeah.
How many total plays has the offense run in that 3-year period?
It's about
and
65 to 75 a game.
As Jeff Kerr, his stat was they ran it 40 something times. They were 37 of 48 when they ran it, but they got stopped 9 times. And in those 9 instances that they got stopped, they ran it again the next play and converted that 8 times. So essentially they were 47 of 48 in getting a first down or a touchdown.
Yeah.
98% conversion rate with that play.
And I believe in Super Bowl 52 that season, and that was Jeff as well, but Carson Wentz was 100%. 100%.
Carson Wentz was a damn good sneak quarterback too.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. He found that little slide. He slipped right through that little
yes,
A gap there.
I always felt like he could dive like 1.5 yards too. He was like 6'6" and shit. But.
Well, you got certain quarterbacks. It was like Michael Vick couldn't slide. It's like he didn't know how to slide. Remember that was the offseason. Like, he's on a baseball field learning how to slide. It's like some guys don't know how to slide. Other guys don't know how to go forward to get a yard. I guess there is some skill in knowing how to kind of not only.
Oh, there is forward. one of the best quarterback sneak. The 2 best I've ever seen. Tom Brady, and who is obviously not the athlete. I'm pretty sure Tom can't squat 600 pounds. He was a great sneak quarterback, and Brad Johnson was phenomenal at quarterback sneaks. Those are the 2 best I've ever seen.
Having the ability to use the leverage, like getting, use your legs to kind of push you forward so that your leverage is going forward as opposed to just kind of trying to dive over. There's a whole heck of a lot of stuff that goes into it.
Yeah, no doubt. Mike, real quick, last question for you, brother. Let's just say for a second that they keep that 32 overall pick. The combine's starting up tomorrow.
Yeah, man.
What position group are you watching the most where you think the Eagles will add to their roster if they are to draft either at that position or around that position, assuming they might make a trade up or down? What's the one position group you got your eyes set on this week at the Combine?
Well, it's the two. It's defensive tackle and it's edge rusher, and they're both pretty deep in this particular draft. I think defensive tackle at 32 probably would be top on the list, especially if you lose Milton Williams. I guess, you have Jordan Davis for another season at least. You got Jalen Carter here. They've got Ojomo. Gabe Hall's a guy they signed from the Raiders. So, I mean, there's a younger player that was a high pick at one point. So they do have some younger depth at that spot, more so than maybe the edge position. But those two positions are loaded with deep, with talent, where 32 would be in play for both of them. Obviously, you're not looking at a linebacker at 32, I would imagine there. The other spot I guess you can think about is somewhere on the offensive line. At some point, you got to think about Lane Johnson. They always seem to get ahead of the game there because they're pretty young everywhere else. Mailata, young guy. Dickerson's a young guy. Jurgens is a young guy. Steen's a young guy. So they're pretty young up front when you think about that offense. And even Becton's a young guy when you want to throw him into the mix.
Yeah.
He comes back too. So those would be the two. They did trade out of 32 a couple of years ago. I believe
That's
they moved
Lamar
back
Jackson.
The Ravens took Lamar Jackson. I think the Eagles moved back and took Goddard in that particular draft. That's something they could look to do this time around again. Move out of 32, move back. Is a good tight end draft as well. So you could see them finally look to, last year there was a lot of talk about, maybe it was 2 years ago when Kyle Pitts was available. Do you take a guy to start to, 2 years away from losing Goddard? Well, now you're at that time where you might have to think about Goddard and his contract coming up. So tight end, maybe not at 32, but maybe you move back from 32 and take that guy in the second round.
Yeah, I asked Daniel Jeremiah about that exact scenario, the tight end scenario, because it happened. He said, there's not going to be a quarterback at 32 that people are going to believe is worthwhile to get that extra contract, the fifth-year option. But he said there's a ton of tight ends, though, if you want to move down. And
good tight end draft.
And
I'm all draft up already, boys. I'm all draft up already.
Yeah.
Ready to go.
By the way, the Eagles, not only the
Michigan,
Eagles,
baby.
The Eagles went down, I believe, to 55 and then came back up to get Dallas Goedert at like 52. And might have been 49, somewhere in that range. But Zach Ertz was 2 years younger at that time than Dallas Goedert is right now. So, yeah, I wouldn't sleep on tight end.
Yeah. I remember this discussion, and John, we had it on my show with you a lot about Kyle Pitts, and it was like, hey, he's too, Goddard is right where Ertz was at the time. Now, Pitts was a high first-round pick. There were some murmurs that the Eagles had some, and obviously that didn't work out. And Pitts hasn't quite been the player that many people thought he would be, although that Atlanta team, I think, is a lot of underachieving.
Was that the Devontae Smith draft? Or
was Pitts 2 years ago?
No, he's a little bit longer. He might have been. Yeah, he might have.
We actually had a chance to get him. Is my point. We were at what 10? We got Devontae. I think we traded.
They moved 12. Up from
they were
12
all
to
over,
10, I believe. 12 to 10.
Pitts went 8.
Yeah,
right. 8.
Pitts was one of the guys they had. They had like a group of 5 players they were interested in that year. And they started at 12, and he was one of the 5. But they kind of knew they couldn't get him.
Speaking of group of 5, there was a D tackle from Toledo that you went and got Quinyon Mitchell from there.
Yeah,
you could go back down that road to go to Toledo to get a D tackle.
Yeah. Mike, who was the Michigan guy you just said? I didn't hear you.
Kenneth Grant.
Oh yeah, he's great.
Yeah, probably would be there late. I don't know, 32, probably somewhere in that round, right in that range. You got the Ole Miss kid, Nolan, who had a little off the field problems, but don't think.
I'm just looking at the draft that now it jogged my memory. The 5 players the Eagles were interested in were Horn, J.C. Horn, Patrick Surtain. That would have worked out. Jalen Waddle, Kyle Pitts, and Devontae Smith was the last one, and that's why they moved up from 12 to 10 to steal him away from the New York Giants. Now, also that year, Now, Jamar Chase was that year. The Eagles knew they weren't getting him. So that's why. It's not like they didn't like him. They just knew they weren't getting him. They also loved Zach Wilson, which is conveniently ignored. But, yeah, they thought Zach Wilson was going to be, but they knew they couldn't get him.
He does have a big arm.
The two, by the way, Michigan has the 2 tackles. Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham is probably going to go higher. Yeah. The Toledo kid is Darius Alexander. He would probably be a guy I'm talking about. You know, you could get 2nd, 3rd round in that same type of Milton Williams type of a lot of traits that he's going to have coming out of the combine this week. You'll hear about him.
Yeah, 32 is such an interesting spot in the draft because it's kind of it gets a lot more subjective at that point where people can make up their minds. All right, Mike, we appreciate you staying a little overtime, brother. Make sure you guys follow Mike at Mike Gill Show. Go and subscribe to his YouTube channel as well. He streams his show there at Mike Gill Show on there, and listen to him at 97.3 ESPN down the shore. One of the best to do it. Mike, we appreciate you joining in today, brother, and we'll talk to you again next week. All right, man?
See ya.
Thanks, bud.
There's Mike Gill joining us here on Birds 365. Great stuff from Mike Gill joining the show here. We'll have Brandon Lee Goutman coming up in a little bit. Johnny Mac, your thoughts on Mike Gill and what he had to say today? We talked a lot of tush push.
Yeah, too bogged down. I apologize for that tush push.
Well,
I you know, 108 times,
that.
you know, it's not that big of a deal. And by the way, they're not going to ban it. They're not going to ban the tush push. Eventually, they'll ban pushing on offense. I firmly, and that's going to happen within the next few years.